This is Allison Angelini. It's 6 p.m. and I'd like to call the meeting to order. Can we do a roll call? Mr. Boudreau? Tom? No. Mr. Taché? Not so much. Mr. Holmberg?
Here.
Mr. Woody?
Present.
Mr. Dombrowski?
Here.
Mr. Mogul?
Present.
And one more call for Mr. Boudreau. Mr. Taché.
You had Tom a second ago.
I thought Tom was on.
I saw him, but I don't see him now.
Hopefully he'll be back.
We will open the floor for citizen comments. Several citizens submitted written comments, which are part of the agenda, and so, you know, in the interest of recognizing that this is our first meeting, and you know, we haven't really gotten started yet, I'd ask that citizens keep their comments short. But
I have a comment, please.
yes, go ahead, Karen.
Okay. Good evening. This is Karen Parkinson, 55 Rose Hill Road. My husband and I own Rose Hill Farm, which is a historic farm that dates back in the 1900s and was here before Ledyard was incorporated. Good evening. I would just like a couple minutes, have a couple comments. First, I would like to commend Eric Treaster's letter to you. He obviously spent many, many hours researching and organizing so much data, plus his recommendations are spot on and deserve your close attention and inclusion in your task as this ad hoc committee. I also just reviewed Mr. Mangle's and Mr. Skarsky's comments as well, and I stand by their recommendations as well. Secondly, I would like to add an observation and your consideration. I am concerned that this ad hoc committee is not balanced. There is an absence of any representation from the livestock farmer. There are many large and small horse farms in this community, and also many other small livestock farmers: cows, llamas, pigs, goats, chickens, turkeys, wild birds, miniature horses. It is a major concern, as many of these proposed zoning regulations would directly affect us. How is this going to be addressed? And thirdly, I want to stress to you, especially to you who are not farmers, exactly what is a farmer. Farming is a business, yes, but it is more importantly a lifestyle and a commitment. Farming is a 24/7, 365 days a year commitment. There is no paid holidays, no snow days, no work at home option, no family leave, no vacations. Farming requires hard labor, long hours, skills in machinery, soil science, animal husbandry, weather, as well as accounting. You rely on friends and fellow farmers in any emergency. You are at Mother Nature's mercy. You sweat in the summer and freeze in the winter, and your crops and livestock are on your mind all of your waking hours. Because our profits are so marginal, many of us have full or part-time jobs as well. So when we heard about some town officials deciding to overregulate us because we might be profiting from accessory activities, it was alarming. Accessory activities that we engage in are most times a lifesaver activity that helps us barely make expenses. These are not activities to make more money. These are ways we can sustain our farms. These are, quote, customary incidental uses of farms. If you truly want farming to continue in Ledyard, then I encourage you to speak up or yell out if you have to protect our rights to farm and not be overregulated. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Does anyone else have a citizen comment?
This is Eric Treaster.
Hi, Mr. Treaster.
Thank you for allowing the public input. For what it's worth, I grew up on a farm. I grew up on what is called a walnut ranch in California, I'm retired and I had some extra time, so I submitted the suggested regulations. The only thing I want to say is I will be I'll be in the audience during your meetings, and if you have any questions on anything that I've done, don't hesitate to ask. And you're also welcome to use or amend or discard as you wish. There's no pride of authorship whatsoever. So use as you wish. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other citizens like to make a comment?
Allison, this is Bill Thorne, 3 Adios Lane. Just one comment. I've read through the draft regulations. I have some comments, concerns, and questions. I'd like to, I know this is your first meeting, and I'd like to put those in writing and present them to the committee. I think that's probably the most efficient way of doing it, as opposed to try to bring them up at this meeting. But I am concerned about one aspect of the regulations, which is this idea that if it's not specifically allowed, it's disallowed. I think that is something we need to look at. I have an analogy that maybe doesn't necessarily apply, but you're going down the road, you have the top down on your car, the radio blaring, your arm out the window, and a cop pulls you over, and he says, well, that's not really disallowed. It's not really allowed, so therefore it's disallowed, and you have to, he gives you a ticket. I mean, I think that is the wrong way of looking at regulations. I know that you can't cover everything in a regulation, but there is the ability to modify it. I think that's a bad road to go down where, if the regulation doesn't allow it, then we must disallow it. And that, going down, there's a lot of evolution, technology, that things have changed. So I think that is one overarching concern I have about the regulations going forward. So I'll just leave it at that, and I will provide my specific comments to the draft regulations in writing to the committee.
Thank you so much. Any other citizen comments? Mr.
Hey.
Mo?
Allison, I'd just like to make a comment real quick about Mr. Thorne's comment.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
So, Mr. Thorne, I appreciate your comment, and the language that's in the draft regulation I don't necessarily agree with, but
I'm having trouble hearing. Is anyone else?
Yes.
Yeah, we lost.
Mr. Dombrowski, are you still there? In the interest of time, we're going to come back to Mr. Dombrowski. Mr. Mo?
So yeah, I do think that it's probably worth at some point this commission talking about that a little bit, because I think there's something probably about zoning regulations that we could probably talk about that's useful for us to do outside of citizens' comments.
It's still public comment period.
Right.
Thank you.
I agree.
I hadn't moved on from citizen comments, and nor was I trying to dismiss.
Thank you.
Dombrowski's
Appreciate
comment.
it.
I just wanted to keep someone talking, and hopefully Mr. Dombrowski's microphone will get fixed. We can hear from him. Go ahead, Mr. Mogul.
Well, in section 3.5, sentence 4 of present zoning regulations, it states, any use not listed or otherwise permitted in the district is prohibited. This is too ultra controlling. Unless it's listed, you can't do it. It really inhibits the development and creativity of farming. That has got to be deleted, just erased. If you look back at previous people before Mr. Woody was the chair, before Mr. Others were the chair, let's say 10 years back, this was put into the regs. It's not anywhere in state statutes that I can find. If it exists in state statutes, please have the town attorney present us with a copy of it, because I can't find it. And I do research for most of my life. I'm a researcher, as is Mr. Woody, and he understands this. The current PCOD, moving on a little bit, states that its goals are to encourage agriculture and promote agribusiness. But it claims to do so by examining whether common accessory uses and agricultural building structures are currently allowed by zoning regulations. This position is not only serve to limit agribusiness development, but will serve to change to promote the economic and operational viability of existing agricultural operations. And while it facilitates and produces, it will limit what we do in agriculture. In the present zoning and regs, in section 2.2, it states very clearly, accessory use and accessory buildings, a use, building, structure, and or portion thereof, customarily incidental and subordinate to the principal use of the land or building, and located on the same lot as the principal use. Accessory uses and buildings in this context are synonymous. They are not excluded, as pointed out in section 3.5. So in the regs as we have them today, there is two contradictory devices. One, it says any use not listed or otherwise permitted in the district is prohibited. So you're prohibited from being creative, whether that's in how you grow your crops, how you process your crops, how you market your crops. So if you want to reach out with an accessory use and say, I'm going to sell a value added crop here through a context of different marketing, well, you got to have a permit for that. Really? Let's wait until there's a problem before we find out where the problems are. We're trying to over-regulate and over-compromise and micromanage farming and leisure. That will stop all further development of farming and leisure. There are lots of other good things, places we can go with the regs. And I'll leave off I have a whole comment here about directional signage, which we discussed earlier on in economic development. However, I've written it all down for people to take a look at. And it is in the quiet corner, standard operating procedure to have directional signage over the town signage. Now, that is in the right of way of the state. I understand that. However, the state senator in that area and the state representative both supported it and got it through. I'm sure if we work on those two people, maybe we can get them to help us get more directional signage for small businesses and activities such as farming and other activities in leisure. If we want to grow leisure, we have to make it business functional, not business limiting. Thank you very much.
Chairwoman Angelini, if I can respond to that really briefly, because I don't want to turn this into a debate, but I think I just need to say a couple of things, and you can kind of judge how to move forward. So first, the statement about accessory uses isn't quite right. So accessory uses is a term in zoning that is meant to be that there are some things that have uses that are understood to be part and parcel of the primary use. And when you have that accessory use, then you don't need special or new permitting for that accessory use. The problem with accessory uses is that they're not defined anywhere. And so it ends up being sort of a decision by somebody somewhere on what those are. But there are absolutely uses that fall into that accessory use category and don't require any additional permitting. The second brief thing is the comment about the signage. The real issue with the signage is, first of all, zoning regs allow off-site directional signage. They currently allow that. One of the primary things that is being asked for there is something that the zoning commission can't do, which is grant permission to put a sign on someone else's property. So the zoning commission can't grant permission for me to put a sign directing someone to my house on Allison's front yard. We can't do that. We can say that Allison can have a sign pointing to my house, and we can say you can have a sign up to this size and that kind of thing. But I can't say she has to have a sign in her front yard. And so that's kind of where that is. So I just want to clear up those 2 points, and I'll be quiet from there on.
Thank you. Do we have any other citizen comments? Mr.
Yes,
Dombrowski, I see you're back.
Allison?
Yeah, is that Bruce?
Yes, it is.
Okay, Mr. Garska.
This is Bruce Garska, 10 Pleasant View, Ledger. Just 2 comments I would like to make.
Hey, Bruce, you're
Yes.
really echoey. Are you sitting right next to Rosemary by any chance?
I turned mine down.
Oh, I heard you.
I'm having trouble understanding you.
Can you hear me now? So?
I can hear you. I'm just wondering if you're both in the same room, if that's what's creating.
Well,
She's going to another room right now.
Allison, as host, you might be able to mute Rosemary's line.
can you mute yours, son?
Yeah, I muted her.
Okay.
And I can hear you better. Sorry.
Okay.
Continue.
Okay, two comments I would like to make. The first is I'd like to thank Karen Parkinson for the comment about it's a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week, 365-day year when you have livestock. There's no getting away from that. And one of the proposals that you have in the regulations is to have a detached accessory dwelling unit. And I must say that would be a very big help for the livestock farmers in the area. The other comment I would like to make is when you have accessory uses and things of that nature, I think a lot of times we don't allow the farmer to determine what is the best accessory use for his farm to generate profits or to get more people to visit. And that comes from the farmer. A lot of times they know what's going to work and what isn't going to work, whereas people who aren't necessarily in the farming community don't know how that works. And I think we ought to be a little more maybe relaxed for the farmer and not so stringent with regulations, because anytime you get regulations, it's very difficult, just like taxes, to get rid of them or to change them. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Any other citizen comments?
I just want to thank Bruce for his written comments too. I thought several of his comments on the current 815 were dead on. So I thank you for those comments.
Mr. Dombrowski, is your microphone working again?
Yeah, my computer decided to freeze itself, so.
Did you want to continue your comment from
Well,
earlier? I'm sorry.
That's fine. I don't know what happened. It's just my computer just completely locked up. No, my comment was in the zoning regulation world, to the analogy that Mr. Thorne had brought up about being pulled over by a police officer, doesn't kind of fit in the zoning world. The zoning world, and it's been backed by case law, is that if something's not explicitly permitted in the zoning regulations, and I can see Rosemary shaking her head, but it is true that in zoning, if it's not explicitly permitted, it's not allowed. So that I don't necessarily agree with it, and I agree with the point of that putting that in the those words in the regulation is probably not a good idea.
Thank you, Mr. Dombrowski.
I also know that me and Mr. Treaster disagree on that point.
It's okay to disagree. I feel confident that we have a really strong group of people advocating for quality regulation, and that we can get through this process and unscathed. So if there are no more citizen comments, I'd like to move on with the agenda. And we'll certainly have time for citizen input as this process develops.
Allison?
Is that Bruce?
Yes, it is. My wife has something. but for some reason she's
Oh.
having trouble accessing.
Rosemary, you're actually not muted, and I can hear you. Your voice is just really quiet. Maybe you can move your mouth closer to your microphone.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Very softly. Are you on a laptop?
Pretty much, yeah.
Can you put it like where your screen is? It needs to probably be closer to your mouth.
How's that?
She is muted.
She has to unmute herself. She's muted.
She's
How about now?
Okay, that's better.
Now you can hear me?
Mhm.
Okay, Mr. Dombrowski, I was not shaking my head at you. I was shaking my head at something else, so I must apologize. I'm really.
My apologies.
No problem. I'm going to keep mine really short and simple. Planning and zoning. I don't understand why we have to have so many rules in planning and zoning. Why can't we go back to the pre-1963 where the farmers, for all farmers, pre-1963 for all farmers, that way their planning and zoning doesn't have to be so stringent. Like this last planning and zoning that came out for farmers. It was really, really strict. Now we have the ad hoc committee, but why was it such a rush to take and get out this strict ruling from planning and zoning? Why couldn't we have stayed with the original ones? Why can't we go back to pre-1963?
So just for clarification, for people who don't know, 1963 is when zoning was inaugurated in the town of Ledyard. So pre-1963 is pre-zoning, so no zoning, just for clarification. So as to the question of the speed, I will say there was no speed, right? So this was something that we discussed over several months in the commission. We hadn't even gotten to the public hearing stage. So I don't think there's any speed to move forward. I do think it's important that we get to a place where we can actually delineate all of these accessory uses that are permitted on farms that the current regulations don't permit.
I have one more question though. From what I was reading, there was planning and zoning for other areas, but there was not any for farms. So why can't we go back to that? Why do we need planning and zoning for all farms?
So it's not specifically for farms, right? Zoning applies to all parcels in town. The principal change in the regulations was there was a change in what would be defined as a farm. So there was an acreage increase, but the primary change was allowing all of that list of accessory uses on parcels that were that would meet that definition of farms.
Okay, now I'm just going to use Paul as an example of your planning and zoning right now. If he wants to take and have a wedding 5 times in 1 week.
So I can't answer that. So there is currently appeal in front of PZC. There's a firewall between PZC and planning and zoning. I cannot make any comments about that. So I understand where you're going, and I'm saying I can't say anything about it.
Okay.
Mrs. Gartzka, if I could, you asked the question, why do we need zoning for farms? And I'm also a farmer, and it's something I've struggled with for many, many years. And we have a representative of the Connecticut Farm Bureau who hopefully will be able to answer that question for us. She explained it well to me, and I'm confident that she can at least present an argument as where zoning could be useful to a farmer.
I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Rosemary Garska, and my husband and I own Heritage Hill Farm. It's a miniature donkey farm.
Just for the minutes, can I get your address?
10 Pleasant View.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Garska. Any other citizen comments? Again, we will have opportunities at upcoming meetings as well. This isn't your only chance to speak, but we do have a long agenda to get. And Seeing no other hands, I'd like to move on to approval of the prior meeting minutes from our organizational meeting back in December. Does anyone want to make a motion to approve the minutes?
Kevin Dombrowski, I make a motion to approve the minutes as submitted.
Second the motion.
Thank you very much. We don't have any old business because this is our first meeting.
Madam Chair, point of order, we need to vote on them.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So, but before we do that, just briefly, I wanted to point out the chair pointed out that I flubbed some of the dates for the meetings at our organizational meeting. The minutes contain the corrected dates, and that's also what was posted. I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention.
There are no corrections. All in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
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 Did I hear Mr. Boudreau on the phone?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
Dick Taché. Aye.
Hi, Mr. Taché. Did you get an opportunity to vote just then? Having trouble hearing again. So if anyone's anyone has a problem with the minutes, just type to me in the chat box and I'll bring the comment back up. But otherwise, we're going to move on to new business. Speaker Joan Nichols from the Connecticut Farm Bureau, just to share some information. She works as a liaison between farmers and towns, so she has a lot of experience navigating this process.
So good evening, everyone, and nice to see you. Hello, Allison and Russell and Paul and everybody. So my name is Joan Nichols. I'm the Executive Director for Connecticut Farm Bureau Association. We are a private, nonprofit member servicing organization. We're based in Wethersfield, Connecticut. We represent nearly 2,500 farm families in the state of Connecticut. I play a number of roles at Farm Bureau. I provide one-on-one support for our Farm Bureau members on individualized issues related to their farm. I also am one of Connecticut Farm Bureau's registered lobbyists, so we advocate for agriculture at the state capitol in Hartford. And then the third role I play is I work extensively with our farmers to help navigate local zoning regulations, which is why I was asked to be here this evening. And just for a point of order, I don't go driving around. Well, I'm not driving around the state of Connecticut right now, but normally I wouldn't go banging on the doors of town halls saying, knock, 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 Farm Bureau wants to tell you how to write regulations or not write regulations for farms. Our Farm Bureau members come to me and say, we've got some work to do with zoning regulations in my particular town. Could you help us out? And I say, sure. So that's why I'm here. So I'd like to speak a little bit to the process of what, in our experience, and I've been working with municipalities and farmers for close to 12 years now across the state in helping to develop right to farm ordinances, ag commissions, and particularly navigate zoning regulations to be more favorable to farms. So I'd like a little bit of the process. So, and pardon me if I sound a little confused as I talk my way through this. So about 3 years ago, and with COVID, everything is like a big blur right now. But I would say about 3 years ago, I was invited to speak to the Ledyard Planning and Zoning Commission, who at the time was interested in regulations related to agritourism at the time. And myself and a gentleman from New London County Farm Bureau also joined me, and we did a little presentation before the Planning and Zoning Commission on how to develop regulations, particularly at that point related to agritourism. I gave everybody my business card. I said, we're happy to help you out. And then I never heard anything again. And then more recently, it was brought to my attention that the town of Ledyard was proposing regulations for farms. There was some concern about the process that these regulations were developed under, some of the substantive issues in the document related to animal husbandry and a whole host of other concerns that the farmers had, which is what I think brought us here this evening. So a little bit about the process. I don't know where you are with these draft, so to speak, draft regulations. I don't know if you're still working off of those. So I was not prepared this evening to give you specifics, but more to talk about the process. But in our experience, the best thing that you could do is to look at your current set of zoning regulations, engage the farmers on what they want to do with their farms in their town, and then if there is a need to amend zoning regulations to allow some of these activities to take place on the farms, you get the input of the farmers. Certainly come to Farm Bureau. I'm happy to help you out because this has been done in many other towns in Connecticut, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And then you go back to the farmers, how does this work? You think this will work? And then at some point, you have to go to public hearing to get your zoning regulations amended. Speaking to why do we need regulations for farms? For the most part, we vehemently oppose any, so to speak, license to farm. We don't want to be regulating how farmers farm, how they grow their crops, how they keep their animals, setbacks for fencing. All of that, that's animal husbandry. That's up to the farmer. They know how to best take care of their land and their livestock and their crops. The only areas that we tend to see where they may need what I would call some reasonable sets, and I underline the word reasonable, sets of zoning regulations for farms are those activities that the farms want to engage in that increases the level of the general public coming to the farm. More related to agritourism and what I consider on-farm retail. A farm wants to put in a farm store or a pretty good sized farm stand. You need some reasonable regulations to allow for parking and public safety and all of that. If you're going to do some events on the farm, it's reasonable to have some form of regulations that will address parking, sanitation, and obviously some respect for the neighbors. It's very important to understand when you're writing these regulations, you got to talk to the farmers, see what's going to work for them. And most importantly, to understand, and I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, to the farmers that are on this call, the farmers live on their land, they raise their families on that land, they care about that land. So I don't know any farmer that's going to engage in activities that is going to be bad for their land, bad for business, is going to create ill blood amongst the community, and most importantly, with their neighbors. Every farmer that I know wants to be good to their community. They want to be good to their neighbors. And so when planning and zoning starts to write regulations that don't consider all of that, it comes across as very much overreaching, overbearing, and to some extent, a little unnecessary. And that's why I get back to the word reasonable. So I'm not going to go into the details because I honestly was completely lost as to where you were with developing any regulations or amending regulations. So I stopped short of being prepared with specifics.
Get permission to have a rooster.
So I'm happy to answer questions, or you can move along with the rest of the program.
Does anyone have any questions for Joan?
Yeah, this is Bill Thorne, 3 Adios Lane. Just a question for Joan. You know, I mean, one of the problems with our regulations, we seem to put all farms in the same category. And it seems to me, I'm not a farmer, so I'm just a citizen. But, you know, livestock farming with the issue of manure and stuff like that seems to be different than a crop farmer who is just growing crops that are just going to be, you know, in place from May to, you know, September. I mean, do you see where regulations might want to differentiate between those types of farms?
Generally not. The only thing that we see, and incidentally, there's a lot of resources out there. I was the subcontractor to Connecticut RC&D, and we literally just updated the municipal guide for livestock regulations. So that's a readily available publication, just came out last year. It's a good reference. With the exception of maybe the setbacks for the housing of livestock, for structures, and, you know, manure management, you really shouldn't be regulating animal husbandry, fencing, that type of thing. And the state right to farm law protects farmers who if they're following generally accepted agricultural practices, they know how to manage their manure. The law sort of protects them. So a lot of that is really, in our opinion, out of the purview of local zoning, other than maybe, you know, the location of structures for the housing of livestock. No different than you have setbacks for houses or any other buildings in town. But again, reasonable for consideration for the configuration of the farm and what they're trying to do.
Hello, Angelina. May I speak?
Yeah, I'd just like to clarify first. You know, we're really not at a point where we're ready to delve into those specific questions about specific regulations because, you know, the purpose of the ad hoc committee was to develop the regulations, and so we're starting from the beginning in a lot of ways, which is why I'd asked Joan to speak about the process. And you know, she had shared some resources which are attached to the agenda. But I would really like to maintain sort of an umbrella view at working our way through the process and keep questions on track with that. There will be plenty of opportunity in the upcoming months to clarify specifics so that we're all in agreement. So yes, Mr. Mogul.
Hi, yeah, hi, Joan. So you're suggesting going back to the present regulations as they exist today and reviewing them and looking for bits and pieces that might be either snipped out or amplified or somehow modified. But taking those ideas and then going back to the farmers, say on a platform like, I don't know, a conversation, so to speak, with various farmers, and then finding out how that would work for them. In other words, if we snipped out certain points of 3.5 line 4, how would that improve things? Or if we looked at accessory uses, do we really need to let the farmers decide what those things are? In other words, let's look at the regs that are in place today and then see how they can be modified to fit based on what the farmers think, not based on something from on top coming down on us. The other thing I'd like to point out is that earlier on in our process, you gave me a copy of this policy book. I think we could all use a copy of that. If there's a new one or that one, it wouldn't hurt a thing to see where the Farm Bureau is coming from. And just as an advocate of the Farm Bureau, I think it's a great idea. I'll be quiet now. Thank you very much for letting me speak.
So the latest copy of that farm book was attached to our organizational meeting. And so if it isn't, we can get Deb to attach that right here as well.
Yeah, certainly our goal is to make resources available that will help guide through this process so that, you know, folks on the committee feel like they have the information that they need to develop regulations.
And can I just add one more thing, Allison? And then I'll let you go on. The other, I mean, you have to, I think, approach this too, like, what are your goals? What's the goal of all of this?
Yes, that's item C on our new business.
Okay,
So
great minds think alike.
I'm really hoping that's why I'm not trying to rush you along, but I'm also like eager to make some headway in the agenda, because I think that if we're able to establish a strong foundation as to, you know, what we're all doing here and what we're talking about, that the process will evolve smoothly from there. Because you know, I fully agree that there's no need for any of us to be unnecessarily reinventing the wheel here. You know, there's a lot of really good regulation out there that we can adopt and then amend as necessary to suit the farmers in town. I also had attached the proposed zoning regulations, which were the draft from August 2020. Judging by my inbox, I think that there was a misunderstanding that those were somehow new or from our committee, and they're not. Those are the same regulations. They haven't been amended at all since the summer. But I think that that's just another resource as we're moving forward and drafting our regulations for the purpose of, you know, working efficiently in what is, you know, a relatively short time frame that this ad hoc committee has been given to write regulation. I think it's important that we all have a starting point. And it's my opinion that the proposed draft, while it certainly, you know, caused conflict among a lot of people, is at least a unified starting point. If we go through it with a red pen, you know, then we go through it with a red pen. But I think that, you know, rather than start from where we are, I think starting with the proposed draft as a working document is my recommendation. Yes, Mr. Mogul.
Well, with due respect, I understand what you're saying, and I totally disagree. I would love to go back to the original regs as they stand today and look at what is in there for agriculture and modify the original regs. With that modification, then we go back to the farmers and have them look at those changes. Looking at whatever is proposed by someone who's not a farmer is not going to be helpful. Frankly, there are 3 farmers here, 4 that can help do this. And we were looking at something that's been rewritten by someone else along. It's just not going to fit. I'm sorry. Going back to the present regulations, modifying them, that's a different thing. But starting at a point that someone else has written, I disagree fully.
So yeah, just a comment. I mean, I think it's useful to do the red pen exercise, even if what comes out of that exercise is that everything is crossed out. And the reason that I think that is it's really easy when you have something concrete and written in front of you to be able to say, this is the problem. You know, and so the draft regulations that was proposed is largely from the North Stonington regulations. So these are existing in action regulations that are here. And so I think it's probably useful to identify, really to walk through those, understand what they mean, find the problematic parts of it, and see if anything is left. You know, so I think it's a useful exercise to do.
Other comments?
Yes, I understand the red pen idea. I think it's a great idea, but I think it ought to be subjected to the present regulations as we have fit. Also, ag tourism in North Stonington is not a big deal. If that is your goal in all this, to look at ag tourism and activities. So pick an area that has ag tourism, such as Stonington, or somewhere else that you like better, Guilford, wherever. The point is, don't look at someone just because they're our neighbor. They're not the same as we are, and they don't have the same goals as we do.
Again, I don't think we're not suggesting that we adopt the proposed draft at all. We're just suggesting that becomes the starting point. And so if we need to get rid of a bunch of items and we need to add a bunch of items. I see the value in having a unified foundation so that in the next 4 weeks before our next meeting, the entire committee is reading through the same document, and that will keep our conversation organized as we move through so that things move efficiently. I'm open to other ideas if anyone else has a comment.
Allison, this is Kevin. I agree with you. Starting with what was the proposed draft regulations is the starting point. If, to your point, if we end up redlining the entire thing, then we end up redlining the entire thing. But it is a starting point. That's the starting point that we were given. So it is, to your point, and I 100% agree. We start with that, and then we work through to make it what would become fair, equitable regulations for the town of Ledger.
This is Bill Thorne, 3 Ios Lane. I mean, I guess the question I have, and I sort of agree with.
Wait, Madam Chair,
Yes.
the public citizens' comments are over.
Yeah. Mr. Thorne, we appreciate your feedback, but we'd like to just keep this portion of the discussion among committee members so that we can make progress on decision making from here on out. Do any other committee members have comments?
Again, I would say that you go back to the original regs, not the proposed. The proposed are not written by farmers.
Mr. Mokel.
So listen, no farmers involved in those regulations.
Paul, we've heard you 3 times already. We don't need to hear it again.
I
Thank
am
you.
listening. I heard. I'm just offering anyone else before we make a motion.
Yeah, this is Russell Holmberg. I'd support working from the proposed regulations and just even as an exercise, just circling and Xing the good parts from the bad parts and see where we stand after that. I was hoping that I could send a question to the Farm Bureau. I'm looking at my screen. Is Joan still on the call?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay. Allison, would it be okay to circle back to that? I kind of drifted into the.
Sure. Yeah.
Real quick, Joan, just when you're in your work in the 159 whatever else towns, has the issue of zoning law versus regular law that you heard echoed in the citizen comments of, well, it shouldn't, it's not allowed because it's not explicit. Has that come up before in other towns? Can you speak to that at all as the only, I think, non-resident on the call?
Sure. And I don't know where, I'm not an attorney or a land use attorney, so I don't know where it originated from, other than I've participated in enough programs with municipal planners across the state as well as zoning enforcement officers. And I've often heard attorneys representing municipalities as well as planners, when they first start to explain how zoning regulations and the purpose of zoning regulations and how they're written, one of the first things they always say is, and keep in mind, if it's not explicitly permitted in the zoning regulations, it's assumed to be prohibited. And I don't know the historical background of that. I can't speak to that. That would be a question for an attorney. So that's why we often say, and this is when the farmers want to throw pitchforks at me at meetings, where I say, you're better off with a reasonable set of zoning regulations that's going to allow you to do what you want to do on the farm, because otherwise the nature of zoning regs is it's not allowed. But with the exception of not regulating the practice of farming, so to speak.
Okay.
Getting to your question, Russ?
Yeah. Just trying to get my arms around, there's a citizen comment that's come up a lot, and we're trying to figure out if it's something that we can fix. And I don't think we can fix it. I think we can just kind of accept it, work with it, and move on.
Right, or include in the zoning regulations activities on farms or farming, is what, the term permitted as of right type of thing. So you define a farm and then you say farms are permitted in these zones. You have a good definition for what a farm is.
Yes, so I definitely, I think, to sort of skip ahead a little bit, maybe we can come back to making a motion as to whether to move forward with the proposed draft. But I think it's really important to establish an intent of purpose for the new ag regulations, and also a clear definition of a farm as we're working through this process. Agree on the scope of our committee. I know there were a lot of, the proposed regulations kind of divided things into multiple categories. And so I'd like to discuss, what this committee is going to be focused on. And then hopefully agree on a process to move forward. So if we could just bump ahead and, establish an intent of purpose. I have.
Are we done with B or?
No, I think we need to come back to B.
Okay.
Which I know is not what people want to do, but I really want people to be on the same page here. And so we're gonna pause B and skip to C. And then hopefully go back and make a motion on B. But I have pulled up the agenda. I'm not sure if everyone can see it. Of a proposed statement. The intent of the proposed regulations is to allow a variety of currently unpermitted non-agricultural accessory uses on lots with legitimate agricultural uses, farms. And that's sort of, that was the purpose of the proposed draft over the summer. Does anyone have any comments or revisions to make to that?
If that was a motion to adopt that, I'll second it, and then we can discuss.
Okay.
I have some comments prior to doing the motion. The second part of that is to allow a variety of currently unpermitted non-agricultural accessory uses. There are no non-permitted non-agricultural accessory uses at the present time in the present regulations. This is a proposal.
The zoning committee and the zoning official disagrees.
Fine. But the point is we're in the Ag Health Committee trying to develop new regulations because no one agreed with those regulations. So let's try to looking at the stipulation from the town council as to what we're supposed to be doing here, rather than something we rewrite in this present situation to redefine our direction. Why don't we use the direction that the town council provided and follow that direction?
So Mr. Mogul, what's your suggestion for amending the statement?
I would stick with the statement from the town council as our purpose, and just make it short and sweet based on what they gave us as a direction. Don't try to rewrite it. Just stay with what they've given us.
Can you articulate that for?
If I had it in front of me, I would, but I don't have it. And fortunately, my screen is all tied up. I'd have to look at Kevin may have that. I'm not sure.
Hold on, I gotta go look.
You, me too.
I have three things open. I got my phone, I got my tablet, and then my laptop.
Yes, I know. Let me get that open.
So I got the resolution. Town council recognizes, therefore resolved hereby establish the ad hoc committee to develop zoning regulation amendments for agricultural uses in the town of Ledyard.
Period. Sweet and short. If that's the motion, Kevin, I'd second it.
That was not the motion. Would the
Any other-
mover of the motion like to entertain a friendly amendment to change it, the statement to read that?
I think technically I made the motion.
But yeah, that's up to you. You can withdraw the motion and then make a new motion if you want.
I think that the statement that I had proposed in the agenda doesn't detract from that. It just is a little bit more specific in terms of focusing on accessory uses of farms.
Hey, Kevin, could you read that one more time for me?
So, yeah, sure. The resolution says, now to therefore be resolved that it's hereby established an ad hoc committee to develop a zoning regulation amendment for agricultural uses in the town of Ledyard. Those are the words that come out of the resolution that came out of the town council.
I think the goal in the minutes is more specific, and there's some benefit in that. I suppose the risk there is that in some ways it does lead us down the path of the proposal from the Planning and Zoning Commission, and maybe that's not what we want to take in the first meeting.
Well, and one other comment I have to make too, is that the statement that is on the agenda as on the motion kind of limits us to only accessory uses. If that's the wish of the committee, okay, but I just recognize that would limit us only to accessory uses.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm fine with the town council statement. I think that, it'll be inherent on this committee to make sure that we don't, we don't try to go everywhere. That we do try to stay focused on what things are most important and the things that we want to, address directly. And so maybe that's something that we should just take up under the scope, and we can talk about that a little bit more there. And adopt the town council statement as the goal. I don't have a problem with that. What do you think, Allison? Where are you at?
I think it's, I guess the idea behind focusing the statement was because it's a lot of information to have to process in a shortened period of time for the ad hoc committee. And, a lot of the regulations for, quote unquote home husbandry, whether or not that's the correct terminology or whatnot, like those were kept the same as are in the current regulation. The additions were for these non-agricultural accessory uses. And that was the initial proposal from planning and zoning, was not to change farming. It was to allow, these agritourism type activities. And so my thought was that if we had, narrowed the scope, that would help us to accomplish what we needed to in the next 5 meetings, and not feel overwhelmed by addressing all of the different areas. But I mean the statement from town council is certainly as broad as it can get, and so I'm fine modifying the motion if that's if that's what people feel best fits.
The only reason I say that is because where I'm going to come with this is that, one of the discussion points that had been brought up in front of land use, in front of the town council, and also in some of the correspondence we've received that's on our agenda, that was provided in our agenda tonight, specifically dealt with setbacks and borders and 100-foot keep out zones, basically, which I think is something we need to address, because in the proposed regulations there was some setback requirements that were highly complained about having 100-foot areas where you had to away from the border that couldn't be used by farms. Is that right? Well, that's up to this committee to discuss, in my opinion, not just the accessory uses. That is, the accessory uses, I think, is a big part of it, but there are other words that were put up in the proposed regulations that also were some heated contention as well.
Maybe they recorded it.
I hope so.
Wouldn't it adopting option C just negate all of that? So if there was a lot of pushback to all that, we would just default back to the existing regulations? Am I misunderstanding that? Because my understanding would be that would just cut all of that. Basically, it would just kind of take a lot of that off our plates, and it would just default back to the existing regulations for things like fence lines.
Not necessarily, because that was what was in the proposed draft. And we would only be responding to one small portion of it.
Yeah, we may tie our hands in a way that we don't want to. So, because, if the committee wants to make statements about that, which, I think we do, we want to make sure we don't want to adopt something that would make that harder going forward, is I think the point, which is
Right.
fair.
Okay.
I hadn't thought about that, but I think it's fair.
Thanks for
Okay.
the clarification.
No, I'll amend the motion to adopt the following statement as our intent of purpose would be to develop zoning regulation amendment for agricultural uses.
I'll second it. Dick-A.
Guess we'll vote. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? All right, we have a purpose. Item D on the agenda would be to establish a clear definition of a farm. I have this definition that was included in the agenda was provided by Joan Nichols at Farm Bureau. And I would make a motion to accept the definition provided. I can read it if you need me to.
No, I will second that motion. This is something that is sorely needed in our regulations. So I agree. This 100%. There's some of the terms you may want to kick out, but it doesn't really matter. But from a standpoint of saying what the definition of a farm is, we should be following what the state statute says.
I would agree.
I would agree as well.
Okay.
I agree.
I agree with a caveat. So this is a definition of farming, right? So this is the state statute definition of farming, which is what is in our current regulations for farming. That is not the zoning definition of what a farm is. And so I 100% agree. This is the definition of farming. This is the definition of farming that should be used. It's the one that we currently use and that we should continue to use. The question from the zoning point of view, and I'm not sure the intention of this bullet, is to determine what parcels farming can be done on. Right. And so there is a difference there. And I just wanted to clarify.
By parcel, what do you mean by that?
A parcel is a piece of land.
But it has a certain size, or is it just an activity or use?
So it would be, so from a zoning point of view, it's everything, right? It's, are there certain districts that are allowed in? Are there conditions of the parcel in order to allow this use on it?
So it could be a size, it could be a use, it could be an activity, all three of those. And we're talking about farming and agriculture, right? Not just farming.
Yeah, the two in the statute and in the regulations are linked together. Yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah. Okay.
This is the definition of farming. No disagreement whatsoever. I just wanted to be clear what we're defining.
Yeah, no, and I agree to your point, but I think further somewhere else in the, so to your point, I think where you're going, Nate, is that, you know, defining what size parcel you could make would be a farm, 3 acres, 5 acres, 10 acres, what area in town, R40, R80, every district inclusive, that kind of thing that would be where the permitted use and by you know, the right to have a farm, which in my opinion should be any district, with the exception of commercial, because it kind of doesn't fit there. And in our town, we only have like 2 areas that are commercial, and you would put a farm there anyway.
We have a farm in one of those commercial districts.
Do we? Oh, I stand corrected.
Gaylord Ferry District, right?
Oh yeah, yes, you're right. I take it back, Baldwin Hill. Yep. So then I amend my statement to say farming should be allowed in any district.
I agree with that fully, as it is right now.
But I think that goes back to the point of the Connecticut Right to Farm Act, which pretty much allows farming anywhere. So that would be in concert with that. It's the intent of where that is.
So is the idea that we would amend the definition to include a specific statement that farming is allowed in any district?
I think that would be a separate wording in the, remember, be careful. Definition is one thing. Allowed permitted use is where we put into the regulatory language in the framework to say farming is allowed in all districts. The size of a farm shall be X acres, one parcel or contiguous parcels, however we want to go lay that out, but that's different. So from a definition standpoint in the regulations, the definition of farming and agriculture, this fits.
Okay, I guess I'd like to make a motion to accept this as the definition for agriculture, and then we can discuss some of those other specifics. Just again, because I'd like to.
Well, the motion's already on the floor for this one.
So I'd like
And
to
seconded,
vote
yeah.
then.
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I apologize. Who seconded that?
Mr. Dombowski.
Okay.
And so, Nate, you're saying that the information that you need is not is a clarifying statement as to.
So I think it's
not where a farm is allowed, because it's allowed in any district, but what a farm.
It was just a qualification, you know, that what we're talking about is the definition of farming / agriculture that we're going to use going forward. But when the zoning regulations get layered on top of that, we'll have to consider, you know, some other things there. And I think we can do that, you know, when we start, you know, going through whatever we use as our basis for regulations, whether it's the current proposal or the current regulations, we can sort of talk about how that plays into it. So it's really just a caution to make sure that everyone understands there are second things here.
Okay. I guess I'd like to discuss sort of the scope of work of this committee, because again, I just want to make sure that we're all using the same terminology as we move forward. And in the proposed regulations, there were distinctions between different types of farms, you know, loosely based on size and use of the land, you know. And so what is the scope of this committee? Are we talking just about farming? Are we also talking about some of the home husbandry regulations that were proposed? Or I just want to make sure we're all talking about the same thing as we move forward.
Yeah, Allison, do you want me to talk a little bit about that, and then we can go from there.
That would be great, because I feel like I can't explain it because I'm not sure I really understand all the different layers.
Yeah, so so there's essentially the proposal considered three categories, and so home husbandry is a something that we have had in the zoning regulations for quite a while, which is intended to allow the keeping of livestock on acres less than 3 acres with a special permit and subject to a fairly long list of regulations. A couple of years ago, we did make an addition to that home husbandry regulation that to allow, backyard chickens. So the intent to be able to allow small numbers of chickens or rabbits or, other poultry on small lots without going through that special permit process. So we've never actually used that special permit, but it has existed for the possibility of allowing livestock on small lots. And so that's home husbandry. The home farm definition was meant to include what we have a lot of in town, which is fairly large lots where people are keeping livestock. So they're keeping horses or they're keeping some goats or something like that on fairly large lots. It's not a commercial operation. It's something they do for their own personal enjoyment. And so the intent of the home farm is to essentially allow that to continue and put it under a specific name without granting it any of the privileges that we wanted to grant to what we called commercial farms. And so the commercial farm definition that we use, and I know Joan doesn't like that word, and I appreciate that, but the intent there is to isolate actual working revenue generating farms and try to give them sort of as many benefits as we can. And so we struggle with how to define those. That's something that we've struggled with for years. And that we're trying to figure out. And so I think the discussion here is, which of those categories roughly do we want to consider and which of those that we don't. I think this committee could, if we don't want to, essentially dispense with discussing home husbandry and leave that for another time. I think that's a reasonable decision and really focus on the commercial farms and those hobby farms. I think it's difficult to not consider those two just because we do have so many of those hobby farms in town. We have lots of them. They've come talk to us many times, so we know they exist. And so we do need to make sure that we at least consider those parcels in town.
Yeah, and I think to follow up, Nate, as well. I mean, when I sat on the zoning commission, we heard one application for the home husbandry, and that was for miniature horses on Pumpkin Hill Road. To your point, it's really home. When I look at the regulation set from home husbandry, it's really more of the me on my 1.25 acre lot wanting to have a horse or miniature donkeys or something not truly a farm that's making the minimum $15,000 or whatever it is that in revenues per year. It's more of a personal use or one or two animals that you would normally find on a farm, but not in a residential zone.
Yeah, I would support anything that kind of streamlines the work of this committee. It seems like it could eliminate quite a bit of friction with the greater community to just kind of let that lay where it was.
So I guess in that case I think the scope of the committee should be the regulation for agricultural uses and not include home husbandry. That would be my recommendation.
Is there a way to move forward on that? Do we need to make a motion or?
I don't think we need to make a motion. I think it's just that we have the discussions, but we're going to exclude home husbandry.
Yeah, I don't think we need a motion on that. I think an understanding among the committee that that's, that we're going to set that category, that use aside and focus on the farms, agricultural uses specifically.
Madam Chair, you concur?
Yes, I think that will help. I see Eric Treaster brought up a point about farmers markets.
I think we can consider it if time permits.
I agree. And so going back, not to be annoying and skip around, but going back to item B on the agenda, which was, having a starting point that we can work through for discussion before our February meeting. I think the two options would be to either start from the current zoning regulations or start from the proposed zoning regulations.
So I'll make a motion that we start as our baseline to use the proposed draft zoning regulations that were provided.
I'll second.
Then open it for discussion in that they are not complete. The proposals do not address a lot of areas, and there are a lot of holes in it right now. So basically, I would go back to the previous regulation that exists today and rewrite those, rather than try to develop a whole new set of regulations that are based on something that has a premise on them, or a preposition or a hypothesis that this is going to work. None of this has been run by a farmer so far, except the 3 or 4 here, and that's it. We don't have a consensus of the community focused on this proposal, none at all. But the community has been working on the regulations in place for several years now. So they know what's there and they know what to expect. This, they don't know what to expect, and it's not complete. So why are we moving forward on this area when we have problems with the present one? Let's look at the present one and work on that, rather than jumping forward to something that was written by someone else who's non-farmer. The process is important. Let's get the farmers involved in the regs that we have today and see what they think of them, and then use those changes to implement a proposed new step forward.
Russ, was that you on the second? I'm going to assume that was Russ on the second.
Yeah.
So yeah, I support. I think you got to start somewhere, and I think starting with the proposal that we put forward and working through what's right and wrong about it, will be really useful to guide where we need to go. And so I think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, this is Bill Thorne, and I appreciate I'm outside the community
Mr. Thorne,
comment period, but
we're gonna just keep it to committee members at this point, because
all right.
There's already been a motion made. Thank you. Can we vote all in favor of taking the proposed draft of the agricultural regulations from?
One more comment is that remember when this proposed regs came out, there's substantial negative comments from the public already on these proposed. So going back to those negative comments would be a good first step in this process. I think definitely it's wrong to jump forward on something that people don't disagree, that do not agree with. I think it's the wrong step, and I'm going to vote no.
And that's great. And again, I just want to reiterate that this isn't, the proposal is not to accept any portion of them. It's just that be the starting point. And so if it's with a red pen, then it's with a red pen, but that provides the foundation of discussion. I think we've all read through these proposed zoning regulations. They've been made public for more than half a year. To allow time for people to think about them. We have a number of citizen comments based on those regulations. It just makes sense. In my opinion, we've been given so much towards these that I think, I think it provides a valid starting point. Not that we need to move towards adopting them. Just that provides the framework for our discussion at the next meeting. I'd like to vote to move forward with those proposed regulations, so that over the next 4 weeks, folks can organize their thoughts on them, so that we can make some tangible progress towards regulations that work for farms in town. All in favor of working off the proposed draft?
Aye.
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 All opposed?
No.
So that will be the starting point. And I will send out, they're attached in this email, so everyone should have them. I can send them out again if anyone needs them. We also have a lot of, as Mr. Mogul said, a lot of comments submitted by the public towards them that we can use as a basis for making amendments at the next meeting.
Does the committee, so the version that you attached there is the correct version? It's the fully crossed out version, so it shows all of the crossed out and reorganizations from the current regulations. Does the committee want the version of this with the crossed out stuff removed? It's a little easier to read. It's up to the committee if they want that.
I would say that if we had both, so one you had a clean read, but one you could also see what was stricken from the old regulations. So both would be helpful. And I'd also like to point out too that the attached agenda is the proposed set of regulations from Mr. Treaster, that we all look at those to see if there's something there that we can kind of bring in. I know Eric does very detailed work, so they could be very beneficial and helpful to us as well.
I agree.
Yes, Deb Dobson had posted written comments from Mr. Treaster, Mr. Garska, Mr. Mogul. So we have that information.
Well, you should also post the comments we made at the Planning and Zoning Committee when these were initially proposed, that all those comments from like 20 people, they should be made available and they should be part of our evaluation of this process. Because that's already on record. We might as well just link it to it and say, hey, look, this is what was said at that time about this proposal. Frankly, the public doesn't like this proposal.
I have a merged PDF of those written comments.
Okay, great. That would be helpful.
And also we may be able to get some stuff that was the point, also comment that were provided to the town council and to the town council land use committee as well.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
So just get with Roxanne and she can get you all that stuff.
Any other new business?
Madam Chairman, this is Tom Boudreau, lifelong resident of Ledyard. Part of me, 15 generations. Just a little history. Ledyard's population was the same for 110 years, between 1 and 2,000. But then a new thing happened. A submarine by the name of Nautilus was built, and people came from all over to work on the first nuclear submarine. All of a sudden, Ledyard changed. We went from 1,800 people in an agricultural town that I remember in 1950 to 5,400 people in 1960 to 16,000 people in 1970. And it's remained largely the same up until now. However, many of the farms were taken over by housing projects. The Big Hurlbut Farm is now the site of Ocean State Job Lot. All of these things changed. And with the change, with the influx of people, we had new ideas. And we went from the selectman form of government to the town council. We collected planning and zoning regs and those kinds of things. And to be very honest, things got better because we had new ideas brought to us. However, We want to, we like to show off the fact that we're a agricultural town, but we like to do it in a pretty way. And I think really our job is to come up with the balance of the farming, the rural suburbia, and a balance that fits all the people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Boudreau. Any other new business? Comments from the committee? Hearing none, I'll make a motion to adjourn at 7:25.
Seconded by Kevin Nabrowski.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nicely run meeting, Angela.
Well done.
And Allison, very good.
Allison, very nice. Very
Very
nice. Thank you.
I'll tell your father, you did a very wonderful job running the meeting.
No, thank you.
I still remember sweating through my first chair meeting. So you did better than I did. So nicely done.
We'll get through this. I just, we just need to get started. I think it's going to go fine. It's such a great group of people.
You did a good job, Allison.
Thanks, Joan. Thank you for being here.
All right. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you.